So during this period, what happens is sodium channels are opened and the potential reaches to 30 MV, which undergoes depolarization. So this is the first phase, that is the polarization, and this is the depolarization. And thirdly, it is repolarized. This is repolarized, where again it reaches to 70 M. So this is a cycle which repeats. So in the diagram you can see that in the resting potential, the positive charge is outside, whereas the negative charge is inside. Whereas in case of depolarization, you can see uh, the positive charges which are present outside are replaced by the negative charges, and this condition is called as depolarized, because here the sodium channels are opened and the sodium channels enters inside. Therefore, the condition changes. And similarly here in the third diagram, you see the depolarization. Now it is converted to repolarization. That means it gets back to this condition, that is the resting potential. It gets back to the resting potential, and the transmission moves on to the next phase. The transmission here you can see it is moved on to the next phase, that is here the negative charges move outside, whereas the positive charges move inside. So this is followed by the next phase, which is called as polarization and hyperpolarization. So this is very easy to understand. It is nothing but the movement of the sodium and the potassium ions inside and outside the cell membrane. So as this changes occurs, here you can see the movement of the stimulus moves forward. So this is the opening and closing of voltage activated sodium and potassium channels. You can see these are the sodium channels open, potassium channels, and it's a rise. Sodium channels close here, potassium channels start to close, and then this is the condition. So in these conditions, this is the rising phase, this is the repolarization phase, and this is the hyperpolarization phase. So in an action potential, here in this diagram, you can very easily understand an action potential in a local area of the plasma membrane is indicated by the orange band. This is indicated by the orange band. You just have to observe here that the reversal of the charge across the membrane. You just see here how this red band moves throughout the axon. It moves throughout the axon. The action potential is a stimulus that causes the production of another action potential. This is one action potential, this is the other action potential, this is the third action potential. So, the action potential is a stimulus that causes the production of another action potential in the adjacent plasma membrane. And the action potential propagates along the plasma membrane. So, this action potential propagates along the plasma membrane till it reaches the end. The myelin sheath of axons are interrupted by short unmyelinated sections called nodes of Ranvier. At each node of Ranvier, the action potential is regenerated by a chain of positively charged ions pushed along by the various segments. So this is a refractive period. It's an absolute refractive period, which is also called as ARP. During action potential in a neuron, a secondary stimulus cannot generate another action potential because sodium ion channels are still operating, and the duration is about 0.4 to 4 seconds, microseconds. Relative refractory period, that is RRF. If the stimulus is higher than the threshold level after ARF, second stimulus can occur, which occurs when the sodium ion channels is closed and the potassium ion channels are opened. You can see here the action potential propagation, how it moves. Outside of the membrane becomes more negative as the positive charges move away from it. Inside of the membrane becomes more positive as positive charges move towards it. And this process is depolarization. And here you can see how the moving of the or the movement of the sodium and the potassium ions inside and outside the cell membrane, and which occurs continuously from one end of the axon to the other end of the axon, and this is the next site for the action potential. So earlier it was here, it has moved on to here, and thirdly it will move on to the till the end of the axon. So this is how the propagation occurs. And you have seen, you also understand that there are two types of neurons. They are myelinated and the non-myelinated neurons. So with respect to that, here there are two types of conductions, that is the axonal conduction. One is the continuous conduction and the second one is the saltatory conduction. So in the saltatory conduction, it is a word used to describe this jumping of the action potential from one node to the other. So here you see when the nerve fiber is not continuous here, that means to say myelin sheath, when myelin sheath is present, you see these are nodes of Ranvier, and here this is the uh, region nodes of Ranvier. So it jumps, the conduction jumps from one node of Ranvier to the other node of Ranvier. It jumps from the one node of Ranvier to the another node of Ranvier. Then this action potential from one node to the other continues till the end of the neuron, and this occurs in the myelinated nerve fiber. It also provides rapid conduction of impulse. It conserves energy for the cell, and multiple sclerosis is the disease in which the myelin sheath is destroyed and associated with the poor muscle coordination. So here in what happens, saltatory condition, it's a propagation of the action potential along the myelinated axons from one node of Ranvier to the next node, increasing the conduction velocity of the action potential. The uninsulated nodes of Ranvier, these are the uninsulated nodes of Ranvier, are the only places along the axon where the ions are exchanged. So only in this region the ions are exchanged across the membrane. You see the positive charges inside and the negative charges outside. In the next, which is the depolarized membrane, and in the next node of Ranvier, you just observe that the negative charges inside and the positive charges are outside. So this is called as the resting potential. So the conduction moves or jumps from one node to the other. Therefore, the conduction is also very fast in case of myelinated nerve fiber, unlike the conduction which occurs in the non-myelinated nerve fiber. Thank you, students.